you do understand, right?
Yes, boss. I understand. So long we keep to our promise.
On that day, I didn't see misdemeanor. I saw grace.
I'm sorry. I cannot help you for Larry. Cut your losses. Get out.
I saw determination.
In this job, you're either leading the race or losing.
I'm just tired of making excuses. Like, I don't even ask for anything anymore. I just want him to show up. Why can't he do that?
For Larry, you can't roll with the big fish without swimming the deep end.
Will this affect the project?
Black men are more likely to be diagnosed with severe mental health and to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act. They are also the most likely of any ethnic group, or the least likely of any ethnic group, to seek help for serious mental health problems. Why? And what are we going to do about this? And by we, I don't just mean the four of us in this room. I mean everyone who's watching and listening to this. Welcome to Unmasking, a conversation on men, melanin, and mental health. My name's Ike Iroche. I'm an executive coach, British, Nigerian-born Brit, and a man who myself have had struggles with my own mental health over the years. And with me to my right is...
My name is Tosin Otudeko. I'm a writer and producer. And yeah, I'm very happy to be here because of the importance of this topic.
Thank you very much.
I'm Chicho Obuaya, consultant psychiatrist, friend of yours from our rugby playing days, and very passionate about breaking the stigma attached to mental health, particularly in the Black community.
Superb, thank you.
I'm Professor Doane Atewologun. I am a business psychologist by background. I run a company called Delta, and we help businesses get the best out of difference. So as a psychologist who helps organizations think about all of the different ways in which we're different, the experiences of Black men in health, particularly how it contributes or influences their performance at work, is really important to me.
Excellent, thank you. So, Dane, you just shared, your professional experience and why this matters. Chichi, you've kind of devoted your professional life to mental health. Anyway, Tosin, your link to this topic is perhaps less obvious than the rest of us. I'd like you to share, for me, what's particularly interesting is that you wrote a story about a, fictional but very successful Nigerian financier who attempted to, end his own life. And then you turned that into a film, Over the Bridge, which got 12 nominations at the AMVCA, right?
Yes.
And won 2 awards?
Yes.
Yeah.
Congrats.
What motivated, what inspired you to write that story, and then not just write it, go, I'm gonna make this, a big budget movie?
Very good question. So we filmed it in Nigeria. So I suppose once you cross the divides, it will be considered possibly low to mid budget.
Right.
However, having said that, though, it was the intention was to make a premium film that addressed the topic sensitively, and that could be appreciated by both audiences, local audiences in Nigeria as well as international audiences, which it was. The reason why was I started chronicling or imagining the life of this man who was living anonymously on another side of the bridge in Lagos, Nigeria, which you can do because of the difference in the demographics, and sometimes you find you can actually live a completely different world in quite a close proximity within the same city. And so exploring or delving into what could have led him to take that journey, and which ended up being a journey where he did want to commit suicide. He pretty much wanted to end it all. And that then got me very, very drawn into just the character journey of what's surrounding his mind, the pressures that he's dealing with. He was working on a large infrastructure project, so how that plays into the fore, as well as his relationships or his dynamics, and any trauma that he had experienced leading up to that. So that started getting me much more interested in the topic. I've stayed on this topic because it's a ticking time bomb.
Okay.
And I think the more awareness and anything that I'm able to do to lend my voice to it is what I'm basically doing now. Yeah.
Wow, ticking time bomb. That's, I don't think even I had thought of it that visually. This whole conversation, as far as I know, started with you doing, because it was 2-3 months ago. You called me. You said you and Tosin had this conversation, and we need to do more to raise awareness of this. And given my personal experiences, I kind of jumped over it and almost kind of took over the whole thing and said, well, we've got to do it this way.
Absolutely.
So you talked about the infrastructure project. A lot of your work is to do with, ethnicity in the workplace. Did any of that kind of ring any, I don't know, anything resonate when she shared that bit?
Absolutely. So part of the reason we're having this conversation now is because it is International Men's Month, but also there's a mental health awareness. So the kind of blend of mental health and international men, or men's experiences, was something that was kind of resonant for me, because I guess for me professionally as well as personally, there isn't enough of a spotlight on these particular what some of us call intersections. So an intersection is like a crisscross of multiple identities or multiple identity backgrounds, etc. So when we think about, for example, ethnicity and gender and well-being, or kind of like ability, disability, the last person in many minds is Black men. I just want to say just one quick example. Like when we imagine things like emotion or tears or care or where our heart goes, the stereotype can be white women. There's almost like an exaggerated stereotype of white women's tears, the frailness and frailty and vulnerability. White women are very, very much allowed stereotypically to show emotion and for people to go to them, run to them and say, we will care for you, we will lift you. And so when you put the opposite of that, in some ways, in terms of ethnicity and gender, like black men aren't really allowed or enabled in different ways, which we'll go into to kind of to show vulnerability, to show their humanity, to show that softness. And they're humans, right? So they will experience that. So those are some of the things that were that I wanted to, and I'm not a black man, so we should center the voices of black men who experience mental health. But I thought it would be good to have the conversation.
Thank you. I'm very, very grateful that you did, and that
Yeah.
you asked me to be involved. You just pointed something out I should have said in the introduction. We're filming this on the 27th of November, 2025. I don't think this podcast will go out until some point in December, maybe even January. But just for context, so it is International Men's Month, and November, the month dedicated to mental health for men around the world.
Yeah.
So anyway, listeners and viewers, you kind of know who we are. Over the next hour or so, we will attempt to get a better understanding of this issue, its causes, and what we can do to improve on the status quo. We've had a few discussions here off screen and on WhatsApp, but we know broadly what we want to talk about, but this is an unrehearsed, unscripted conversation. So there might be the odd awkward pause or two. Allow us that, please. Mental health is a broad, often misunderstood topic. So I think maybe a good starting point should be to give some sorts of definitions or descriptions to guide our conversation and help our listeners. So Chichi, as our resident psychiatrist, why don't you talk a little bit about mental health in general, and then more specifically about how it pertains to black men, which I know Doing has started to touch on.
Yeah, so I think bringing these themes together, what we're dealing with are probably 3 levels of stigma. And it's important to recognize that, because this conversation isn't going to necessarily massively shift the needle, but awareness is really important. And you can't have too many conversations about this. So the first level of stigma is around mental health itself.
Yes.
And it's important to start with that. As you said, it's really broad. So if I talk about physical health, the first thing you would say is, okay, but what are we talking about? Are we talking about orthopedics, cardiology, neurology? It's too broad. But mental health conditions are also really, really broad. So that can be everything from mood disorders like depression, anxiety disorders, which would include generalized anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. You've got psychosis. And I think the discussion around black men's mental health often jumps into that. And I'm sure we'll touch on that, but it's much broader than psychosis. So that includes schizophrenia and related conditions. You've got disordered eating, alcohol-related problems. So it is just so broad, and even burnout would fall under this. And I'd argue that burnout's maybe one of the access points, because it's something that can be more readily normalized.
Right. Okay.
So when we're trying to address stigma, it's a nice gentle way of introducing it. So that's just mental health. Then we've got to think about men's mental health.
Yes.
And some people may think, what stigma is associated with that? But as you pointed out, there's the issue around the sort of literacy and the language that men develop. That's part of it. There are different access points to health, and we can talk a little bit more about that. So men and women do not access healthcare in the same way. And when you don't have the same touch points, that can create challenges, but also potential opportunities for where we could go in the future. Then you have black men's mental health. So what are the things that are unique in terms of clinical presentations, the more nuanced level of stigma there? So we've got to think at those 3 different levels.
Okay, where do we start unpacking that? Okay, I guess let's start at the very top, the stigma about mental health in general. Yeah, I'm struggling to find the right
Yeah.
question. So
Well,
someone jump. Yeah,
I'd
Dorian,
like
please
to
help me.
jump in because one of the things that we've touched on, but we haven't. I mean, there's so much in what Dr. Obuaya has said, but I think there's a lot in terms of when we blend mental health and the Nigerian culture.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I know we are filming this in London, but we all have Nigerian heritage.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things, I mean, I'm sure we all have many stories, but one of the things that certainly comes to mind is just growing up and even conversations today, the
Yeah.
hush-hushness, the hush-hush nature of people's mental well-being.
Yes.
So I had a call recently from a friend who said, okay, Doing, I just want to let you know, one of my friends, her sister, their brother, my friend's brother, they're struggling. We don't know. We don't want to speak to anyone in the country. Maybe you can help. And the first thing that I said, said a number of things, but one of the things was we need to to the degree that we can be more transparent about it. So
Yeah.
would love people's thoughts around like how culture can influence this sense of stigma and your own experiences.
Absolutely huge. And I guess that's why the film is really important, because storytelling is powerful. And it's a way of just getting minds thinking and trying to break some of those cultural norms. So that goes up a level when you then start thinking about gender roles and what it means to be a Black man,
Absolutely.
a Nigerian man in that sort of society.
Yeah.
So I think Nigerian culture, whether it's in the diaspora or in Nigeria, is very alpha. We're entrepreneurial. We have that hustle mentality. And that implicitly means that mental health, which might be seen as something that is to be ashamed of, might be a sign of weakness, that leads to that hush-hush approach.
Absolutely.
So part of the goal here ultimately has to be, how do we even change some of that perception? And for me, it boils down to the storytelling and to leadership and courage. So when I'm talking to members of the public in corporate settings, I think about examples outside of our community where that's been addressed. So Nigerian men, Black men, and let me just say that there are a lot of stereotypes.
Yes.
But guess what? A lot of them are also true. A lot of men will draw on their identity from work, status, money, resources. So that's going to be one of the key places that you can address things. I think of, in a different context, the impact of the former CEO of Lloyds Bank in the UK, Antonio Horsha Osario. This is at the time of the global financial crash. He was heading the bank, which was bailed out by the British government and the taxpayer. And he had a breakdown. He went through burnout. And rather than keeping it hush-hush, he disclosed that this had happened. He was admitted to hospital. This is all in the public eye. And the impact that ultimately had was huge. Because within his organization, I think they employed around 40,000 people at the time, was that they developed mental health champions. It meant that his colleagues were given permission to come forward. Because if the CEO is a human being and can suffer a breakdown, well, maybe I have permission to speak to my line manager.
Yes.
That's the sort of change that we need. Another example that would be relevant to our community is within the faith communities. So there are a number of examples of pastors, priests, who either directly themselves or family members have had major mental health challenges. And I always think of, and it's not to be critical, let's be clear, but I think around the culture around churches in Nigeria, where it's very hierarchical, where the priest is I hate to use the word, but revered and seen as someone who's almost untouchable.
Yes.
I think we're quite far away from someone who has that kind of public standing saying, I've suffered an anxiety disorder or depression. And that would be the kind of move that would move the needle for me.
I love that. And I think one of the things that makes it worse, more complicated, is the potential over spiritualizing of how you're doing in your mind. And essentially, like, you know, go and pray, go and fast, that will fix it. So I think, you know, that example.
Or go to the
where
village
someone
for
goes
deliverance.
go to the village for deliverance.
And then the professionals come in as a last resort.
Yes.
These are some of the practices we've got to try and challenge.
What's so interesting, sorry, about what you've said is that in contrast, in the Bible, you actually have clear examples of prophets who actually, you can probably say, went through a mental health crisis. So as an example, like Elijah gave up and prayed. And what was the result? Eat a little, sleep a little. Okay, let me take this burden away from you. Actually, let me give you a succession plan.
That's a great example.
You know, so definitely, you know, when you actually try to put things in context, like you said, not having unrealistic expectations of those who are meant to lead us, so much so that we feel when we look at them, and this is the same thing, I suppose, with sons and their fathers or employees and their employers, when you look at them, you feel, well, they can't fail, I can't fail. So almost it's also like the examples that have gone before, what are our, and I guess I have two boys, so of course I'm always thinking, what are those examples that our young boys are looking at? And that's what causes the stigma.
Yeah.
I feel the entrenched stigma.
I would love to ask Ike a question, if that's okay. Yeah.
Of course it's okay.
Because you shared at the beginning, you know, right at the beginning about your own personal experience, and we've been talking about culture and stigma, and you know, one of the things Shitty talked about was also leadership and telling stories. So just love your own thoughts about your own experience and how some of this fits or doesn't fit.
Yeah, I mean, so much of that resonated. You know, one of the reasons I'm here, one of the reasons I immediately pounced on this when we had that call going is, since I got better, number one, and better at managing my conditions, because they haven't gone away, they're still there. I have made it a point, because I realized that in various roles that I've had, I come across as very confident. You know, there are people who look up to me. So I've made it a point to tell this story repeatedly to try and normalize it. You know, so my own personal effort to removing that stigma. But, you know, it's so correct. I think, so in terms of, you know, what I struggle with, so I have OCD, and I've had that my whole life. I don't remember a point in my life when I didn't have OCD. I was diagnosed with depression around the age of 25, I want to say. But when I think about the symptoms, I think I'd probably been dealing with depression since I was an undergraduate, you know, in and out of depression for that time. And then anxiety hit me 2016, I want to say. Well, you know, I was thinking, you know, because we're preparing for this, I've been thinking a lot.
Yeah.
I probably had symptoms of anxiety much earlier, but 2016 is when it got to crisis point. But so I'm jumping all over the place, but my diagnosis was 2003. I always remember when it was June 2003. I struggle with IBS, so you know, and I've had stomach issues since I was about 8-9 years old. Struggle with IBS, and I was really struggling in my early 20s, my early career. And a good friend of mine from university, his dad was a GP, and said, "Look, my dad's had lots of success with IBS patients. Why don't you go see him?" So rather than, you know, my regular GP prescribed me medication, and basically said, "I have patients who've been on this for 30 years. I have patients who've been on it for 10 years and then one day stopped." That was my advice, right? You might stop one day. So I went to see my friend's dad, and he just chatted to me about my life, which didn't seem odd to me because he's my friend's dad. He knows me, so I thought he was just catching up. And half an hour, he was like, Mikey, you're depressed.
Mm.
I don't think I'm going to prescribe you antidepressants just yet, but and literally the voice in my head, I still remember it like it was yesterday, said, "I'm Nigerian. I don't have time to be depressed."
Yes.
That's what that voice
Yeah.
said.
Mm.
So, back to what you just said
Yeah.
about the male programming
Yeah.
and, the cultural expectations.
Mm.
But I remember I got back home. I was living with 3 flatmates. We all went to school together. I went to school in Exeter, so we were all living together in East London. And I told them, yeah, I saw a doctor today, said I was depressed. And they all looked at me and looked at each other and said, yeah, we could have told you that for free.
Oh, wow.
In hindsight, sometimes I go, why didn't they tell me? But again, this is one of the things we're talking about here because it's the stigma. How do we tell this alpha male rugby player, macho man that we think is depressed? He's probably going to tell us to go do one, right? Anyway, I got home and so my flatmate said, yeah, we could have told you that for free. Luckily for me, my next step was, okay, review your life. What are the things that you're struggling with? What things that are making you unhappy? And one of them was I absolutely hated my job. The culture of the company I worked for had changed drastically after the dot-com boom imploded. A lot of the people who I'd looked up to and got on with had left, including one of the co-founders, and there was a lot of pressure on us to make money in very difficult conditions. And I made the decision that night, I'm going to find a new job. So I updated my CV the next day. I made the second decision, as Chichi mentioned, we played rugby together. I made the second decision the next day that I would no longer stay in the office for hours and hours trying to figure out how to make money. So 6 p.m., Monday to Friday, I picked up my bag and left the office. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, gym across the road. Tuesday, Thursday, across town to Linford Christie Stadium where we were based for rugby sevens training because it was in the summer, right? And very quickly, that new routine, my mood started to improve, right? So that worked for me, and I kind of ignored my mental health for another decade or so until I decided to go freelance in 2013. That coincided with the company I worked for going under. And I think we got given like 2 weeks notice that we were in trouble. Yeah. And then one of my brothers got married in Lagos. I remember going for that. It was a very emotional, intensely emotional month of April. I remember March, April 2013. Then I got back from Lagos. Your brother, who is one of my closest friends, introduced me to someone he'd met at a conference.
Oh, wow.
We started dating. So it's very intense summer passion. And then that ended.
Yeah.
So I've gone through all this in 2013. I'm trying to start my own business, and depression hit me hard. And so this is in hindsight, thinking about when anxiety came in. There's one of my closest friends at university. She's actually a white English female from Essex, Georgina. I remember we met up for coffee one afternoon in the city, and she's like, "Ike, what's wrong with you? It's like you have zero, all your self-esteem's gone. What's wrong?" And she said she's been seeing this hypnotherapist. I'm going to put you in touch with her. And I got in touch. It turns out George even paid for a session for me. It's like, yeah, your friend's already paid for it. So the hypnotherapist helped in terms of calming my anxiety, and then she recorded the things that I used to listen to fall asleep when I felt anxious. So that helped. But I didn't do anything about my mental health problems other than, listen to this when I wanted to fall asleep or when I felt I needed calming. And I mentioned Georgina and the next person because of Chichi talking about how men and women access mental health care differently. I didn't seek help until I think it was 2016 when I was really, really struggling. When I read an article in The Guardian about Sarah Knight. Sarah Knight was at the time the best batswoman in international cricket in the world, but she hadn't played for 10 months because she was struggling with anxiety. I was a recruiter at the time, I used to love cold calling. I wouldn't pick up my phone. To call people, I'd ignore it when my phone rang. So I was like, she went through what I'm going through. This is what she loves. It's what she's good at. She's known for. And she was scared to walk out onto the cricket field. I'm scared to pick up the phone. And so in an interview, she talked about how she discovered cognitive behavioral therapy and how that really helped her. So I thought, okay. So I looked up CBT and thought I should get that. But I didn't quite do anything until, sorry, this memory always. So I live in Putney, Southwest, and the flat I was in at the time is quite near the river. So I often would walk over Putney Bridge from Putney Bridge Station, and we lost a young cousin shy of his 22nd birthday, who was on antidepressants, really struggling, jumped in the Thames. It was ruled an accidental death, because eyewitnesses said he was crying for help while he was in water. But the fact is, he was struggling with his mental health. He told his ex-girlfriend that he often felt like he needed to shock his brain to reset it. So, which is what the coroner concluded that's what he did, jumping in the water. But a few months after reading Serenai's story, I remember walking over Putney Bridge, thinking, I get it now. I know why he did it. But the thing that stopped me actioning that was, I first of all thought about my mother. It's like, because one of the things I had done is I'd read about people who had taken their lives and the impact it had on their families. So what is it going to do to my mother that her first son, and then I thought about my brothers, and then I thought about my then fiance, now wife, who lived in Nigeria, planning to move to so that stopped me from doing that. But then my next thought as I walked home was, okay, you're not going to take your life, but you're no good to anyone. So why don't you just F off? So my next plan was I was going to pack a rucksack with as many clothes as I could fit in, leave all my ID in the flat, leave my keys in the flat, take my bank card, withdraw all the cash in my account, ditch the bank card, and disappear. No idea where I was going, and that was a very miserable night. I didn't do it. And then a few months later, exactly the same sequence, walking over Putney Bridge. I know why he did it. No, you're not going to do that. You're going to disappear. And that's when I finally said, I need help.
Yeah.
And I called my GP. And, I have a autoimmune condition, Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. So at that point in time, I'd seen my GP a lot. So we had a good relationship. And he's actually, funny enough, he's British Indian of a similar age. He might be a year older than me. So he was someone I felt safe to talk to. And it's only when we had this conversation that I remembered I didn't even tell him about the suicidal thoughts. I only spoke to him about the OCD. But I said I wanted CBT, and so he referred me to the NHS. I flew to Lagos for a conference, did a speech in front of a group of CEOs at the Nigerian Stock Exchange, got married 2 days later. All right. So no one other than my fiance knew I was struggling. I'm a GP, right? Because outwardly I'm still uber confident, in control, control IK, all smiles and laughter at the wedding and everyone who came along. And I got back, and Bumi, that's my wife's name. Bumi, while she was waiting for her spousal visa to move to London, so we'd speak on the phone. She's like, have you heard back from the psychologist at NHS? No, I haven't. And then one day she was like, look, I know you haven't worked for a while because, oh, sorry, I forgot to say this. I couldn't work because I couldn't pick up the phone, right? I know you haven't worked for a while, so the idea of spending money is probably quite scary. But this thing's stopping you from working. So why don't you treat it as an investment in your business and go private? I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But then how do I find a psychologist? So, talking about physical health, this is when I realized the similarities between our mental health and physical.
Yeah.
Because also my brain was broken.
Yeah.
Finding a psychologist seemed like the biggest task in the world. Where do I even start? Thankfully, I called this guy. And I said, teacher, I need a psychologist. And he's like, okay, I can't talk right now. Can we speak this evening? I want to understand. I want you to tell me what's going on. So we had a 15-minute conversation that evening. And he's like, okay, yep, I think CBT is definitely the way forward. What do you want in a psychologist? Well, I wanted to be near home because getting on the train seemed like a big task, right? That's how broken my mind was. So Chichi came back like the next day with 2 recommendations. One was in Chelsea where I could get on a bus. The other was at the Priory in Roehampton where I could walk. It was a half an hour walk, but I could walk. So it was like Priory. And thank God, brilliant psychologist, Colin Blowers. Had about 13 sessions with him over 10 months. I took copious notes. I reread my notes last week even, all my notes from Colin. That really helped. Sorry, I just, but you know, the stigma, I had close friends who said, when I tell them like, you know, but we saw you a few times, why didn't you tell us? And I don't think this was stigma. It just didn't occur to me that they might be able to help. It just never crossed my mind. And when I think of the women I know, most women I know would tell their close friends, I'm struggling with X, I'm struggling with Y. As a guy, even Chichi, I only told him because I know he's a psychiatrist. Because I know he would understand this. He wouldn't judge me. He wouldn't go, because again, you know, thinking about, you know, both your brothers who I'm close with, at that stage in our lives, I'm not convinced they would have taken me seriously or known how to help me if I had said to them, I'm struggling with this, right? We've all had situations since, we're all a lot more mature where we would know what to do. But going back 10, 15 years, I'm not convinced. And I think that's something that a lot of Black men, we've talked about Nigeria because we are Nigerians, but, you know, the Caribbean community, other African communities, this is a regular struggle. Conor Benn, the boxer, Nigel Benn's son, if you know, for the boxing fans listening, you know, he talks about how when his dad moved to Spain when he was young and he was in a expensive private school, but it was a Christian school. When he was struggling with his mental health, he was told he had demons, right? So yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going with all this, but
You've kind of covered the entire podcast with your story.
okay.
But no, in all seriousness, thank you firstly for sharing
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
It's incredibly powerful. But we were talking theoretically about the power of storytelling and these different levels of stigma. You've encapsulated all of that in your story, and my head's going in so many different directions. I don't know where to pick it up. But firstly, thank you.
Yes.
I wanted to pick up on 1 or 2 points, and ladies, please do chip in. What's tough for me personally listening to that is I've known you since 2001. But again, this brings home the point. We were on the same team. So we played for London Nigerian Rugby Club. It was very alpha, that culture. But we'd hang out, and our friendship developed over those years. So I didn't know you well around that 2003 period. But when you think about the amount of time we spent together or in the same space, Tuesdays, Thursdays, training, all day Saturday, pretty much, going to games, playing the games, traveling back home, going out on a Saturday evening. And this goes to show that even for someone, and at that time I was finishing my medical school studies and then going into a career in psychiatry, I wasn't picking up any of this. I remember when you launched your business and I'm just thinking, oh, cool. Yeah, he's doing his thing. It's going well. So we make all these assumptions, and we have to be more intentional within cultures like this and subcultures for those conversations to happen. And an important point to make is that we're not saying you can't be a rugby player, footballer, like drinking beer and doing all those kind of really masculine things. That doesn't have to be in conflict with being able to talk about your feelings.
Absolutely.
It's how do we encourage men, and again, you've highlighted the difficulties. How do we encourage men where are the touch points where we can just open those conversations? That's the key for me.
I have two parallel kind of thoughts or lines of reflection. And I think one is for people who are listening who know the rugby player, the football player, the beer drinker, like the friend. What are some of the things they could listen out for or look out for? So that's
Yes.
one. And then the second thing, so to just kind of feed that, but the second thing is, okay, I mean, you said so many things, which, again, thank you for sharing. And I was taken by your reflection that actually you don't think the thing that was stopping you was stigma. And I think I also want listeners to think of the word stigma very broadly, and maybe that's not the right word, because we could use stigma, we could use shame, we could use diminished, we could use devalued, we could use, it's just not a thing that's important. And it's a thing that if I bring it up subconsciously or consciously, I don't think you will engage with me on,
Right.
so I will move it aside.
Good point.
So just want to go back to that first question. And, I think for all of us, we will have, I mean, certainly for me, but I also know because 1 in 4 persons struggles with mental health. If the person struggling with mental health isn't here, it's in our family, it's in our friendship group. So I've definitely personally struggled with mental health. So I want to kind of bring it back to all right, what are some of the ways, either professionally and personally, we can share with listeners? These are some of the things that I've noticed or that might be worth noting. Yeah. So yeah, maybe we start with Chichi and then Tussie. Would love your reflections and I'd jump in.
So what would I like an outcome of this conversation to be, and other conversations that have been happening? I think it's important to say that things are gradually moving in the right direction. It's just not uniform. So why we're having this conversation now is that certainly in the UK, where we're all based at this point in time, over the last decade, there's been massive positive movement in the workplace, in society, and it's about normalizing, having conversations.
Absolutely.
And I think for men, it's about putting it on the menu so that when you're playing rugby and you're drinking your beer and you've got that 5 minutes where someone else has gone to the bar and you're just one-on-one, you just kind of notice, actually, where have you been for the last month? What's going on? And the ability to have those conversations. We're not asking people to become experts.
Yeah.
It's about being curious and not judging people.
Yes.
Because we've spoken about situations where, and you did exemplify this, IK, that you felt you were going to be weak. I think you used that word. And almost like you didn't have permission to be that way, and you weren't able to construct exactly what was going on. So I think that's it. And then as people did around you, when you did manage to open up, or when they were spotting it, just pushing people in the right direction of help.
Yeah.
And all I would say as a professional is, I think, again, going back to this word stigma, what also doesn't help is what the perceptions are of what that help might look like. Who's delivering it? Are they going to do something weird to me?
Indeed.
All of those questions, which we haven't really touched upon.
Absolutely.
But those are some of the additional barriers that people face. So a few things I'd just like to point out. Psychiatry is the same, it's a medical discipline. So we're adopting the same approach, which you've also highlighted.
Yes.
There's a problem. We need to work out, just like a knee surgeon would. You've got knee pain. Okay, but does that mean that you've got a cartilage problem? What's going on in your bones? Let's have a deeper dive. We want to understand you're presented with anxiety or a low mood, and we're going to come out the other end with a diagnosis and a treatment plan. And those treatments are, broadly speaking, biological, so that might include medication, psychological, including therapy, and environmental changes that we might want to implement. So I think when people feel that it's not going to be this weird thing, or
Yes.
also just understanding that medication can make a massive difference to people's ability to function. It doesn't have to necessarily be lifelong. That's the level we need to get to with the conversations as well, so that people don't feel scared to come forward for help.
Yeah. And I think in terms of I almost feel like we almost all need to be trained in our reactions as a community, as a demographic, in terms of like, so where when this is said, it's not with this kind of, really? Oh no, okay, now let's ostracize them, that kind of thing, which is generally what the fear that that's what's going to happen. And sometimes, I don't know, I was thinking about this and I thought, I think, obviously, it's not scientific or anything. I almost see mental health as you are developing holes in your brain and your system. So there's these holes that are basically being just sort of irreparably caused. These sort of that's causing irreparable damage. And these successive, this period of you getting these successive holes eventually leads into, they all merge together to form, amalgamate basically to form one big hole that it then now is, then you have to do something about it. So basically when you're developing all the little holes, you're able to get by, you're able to function, you're able to pretend, because at that point they're just small little impacts in your life that you feel you can deal with. And you mentioned that you thought you had, you believed that you had actually been going through depression about 20 years ago, and then you had some sort of intervention, but then you still carried on for another like 10 years. Basically, it just goes to show how long that you can actually carry on with a mental health problem. By the way, this is something that you should be getting help for, or perhaps you could have gotten help for from day one. So you can now imagine that span of time where you've been going about in this effectively sort of damaged, not fully functioning way, but however, still kind of pushing and striving. And that's you as an individual. Now imagine the resultant effect, all the interconnected consequences of you also not taking care of your mental health. So the people who are taking care of you, again, those who possibly may not be trained or don't understand, etc., how to deal with, whatever it is that you may be dealing. So imagine if it just happens to be the wrong connections, the wrong relationships, the wrong circumstances, and that's what leads to more tragic consequences. So it's so complex and it's so multi-layered that you can't gloss over this. You can't just, because it's one person, but it is society. There's what I also find is that there's just a lot of people who are getting by, but they're not getting by very well, but feel that they are. So it's coming out in their reactions, in their responses, in their possibly overreactions and decision making. And that just doesn't just affect one person, it affects a whole span, sometimes could even affect generations. And I know, so so you're finding one thread that, and you pull that thread and it's kind of just unraveling the entire thing, and you want to sort of get it at the beginning before the seams start to.
So just picking up on that and going back to the challenge of how do you do that in this context of trying to be a strong Black man.
Exactly.
I think it's important to say that resilience is the word that's bandied about a lot. And I'm trying to remember exactly how you phrased it. It was something about that bloody mindedness of Nigerian culture. But it doesn't mean having these conversations and expressing a degree of vulnerability isn't in direct conflict with some of the good aspects, which I think we probably all agree there are around our culture.
Yes.
There's a determination. I think we are quite resilient in a lot of ways. But there is also room to say, I need help. And we're also very community focused. So that should be seen as a strength.
Yes.
That's very true.
And strength doesn't need to be individual strength. It can mean that we're resilient as a system. And sometimes you need to lean on that and lean on friends and family.
Absolutely.
So that's one area where we need to see some breakthrough.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been thinking about how relational or relationship oriented we are as a culture, and how that, in some ways, Tosin, you were saying that like some people are handling like these kind of metaphorical kind of holes in your brain, but in some ways I think potentially they're positive examples of when people have, which I know you'd agree, because you weren't saying there weren't any, but I think it's interesting that they're probably positive examples of how us being so relationship oriented
Yes.
helps
Mm.
people get through these challenges,
Yes.
maybe more so than in other cultures where there
Very
isn't
true.
that much of an orientation towards kind of family and community. So that
Very
leaning
true.
in. And
Yes.
so just thinking about what are some of the pros. I think we still
Yes.
also absolutely need to do more talking, do more spotlighting, make
Yeah.
it, give permission to ourselves and each other, asking questions,
Yes.
while also celebrating the fact that we all have an auntie who's like, you haven't called me in a while. How's it going?
Exactly.
Or people who just show up at your door and like,
Without
we will
permission.
celebrate. It's your, it's your birthday.
Yes.
So I think there
That is
is,
so important.
something about
Yeah.
leaning into that. Maybe,
Yeah.
I
highlighting
love
the
the point around
positives
the
of that.
community.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's important. Yeah.
Listening to all three of you, so that point about the community, that brilliant statement about, I can't remember the phrase, but we all need training in, because I think my experiences have given me that training.
Yes.
So again, in preparing for this, doing a lot of reading, I came across a 2018 video. I think the BBC filmed with a blogger called Lulu Ade. So I suspect British Nigerian from the name, whose brother was really struggling with the mental health challenges. From the video, she said literally family, at the worst, the family members were taking it in turns to go to his flat. I presume they had a key
Yeah.
to check on him.
Yeah.
But so the video, she got 4 different young black men who had struggles with mental health, talking about their experiences. And for me, it really reinforced to me the importance of what we're trying to do today. And because my heart went out to them, because, they're showing examples of, talking to their closest friends who almost ignore the topic altogether or say things like, man up. One had his dad say, he'd lost a very close friend like 2 weeks earlier, and his dad was like, you're not the first person who's had someone die, and stuff like that. It's got me thinking about, so when I've in years gone by, when I've spoken to people struggling with their mental health, I was always very quick to give advice. Do this, do that. And going through my own challenges, I know that's quite often the last thing you want. In fact, if someone would give me do this, do that advice, what my head heard was, I'm not speaking to you about this again.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess the message I'm trying to get is, one thing that we should be striving for, if you're listening to this, is using that community strength, is let's get better at asking questions and listening. Let's get better at allowing our loved ones to unload themselves on us.
In a
Now,
non-judgmental
space.
space.
Exactly, without judgment. Obviously, if you have a loved one who is regularly offloading to you, that's going to
Yes.
be a lot for you as an individual to deal with.
Yes.
That's definitely actively try and encourage them to find help.
Yeah.
But I guess the message I'm trying to send is, let's try and avoid judging and presuming we have a fix, because you don't know what that person's going through. As Chichi said at the start, there's so much under that mental health umbrella. So, our aunt, she's one of the people who literally, I remember doing day after my very worst day. So during therapy, I actually had a day where I decided you're of no good to anyone on this planet, and it was really, really horrible day. And the next day, so our departed cousin's mum called me, and I let the phone ring, and I was going to let it ring out, and then I just thought, no, answer the phone. And she knew about my mental health problems even before she lost her son. So I picked up the phone. She said, "Oh, how are you?" Blah blah. And he said, "Good thing you answered. I've got the day off tomorrow. I was going to show up at your front door."
Okay.
Um, but what I loved about her is she just asked me what's going on. No judgment, no do this, do that. Just listened. So that's one thing I'd encourage any listeners who are not professionals.
Absolutely.
Be a kind ear. Make that person feel, okay, this is someone who will hear what I have to say and not think less of me. That's a starting point. Unless you're going to count. Yeah. Okay.
Not at all. And I hope that's also a relief to hear, because one of the burdens is, I don't know what I'm going to do with that information. What is the fix? And
So
it goes back to the community aspect, whereby we can probably work it out collectively. But the other thing that you mentioned that's really important is the need for that support to be sustainable. So it's not about having one 5-hour conversation on the phone.
Yes.
It's actually about multiple 10-minute conversations, so that it is sustainable. Otherwise, it's going to be overpowering, overwhelming.
Absolutely.
And that's where people tend to withdraw support, which also isn't helpful. So I think it's holding off any instinct to quickly find a solution. As you said, just having a listening approach and taking it from there, and just saying, okay, we've had this initial chat, let's catch up in a week's time.
Right.
And I think it's possible to implement boundaries and be caring at the same time.
Yes.
Everyone has things that they need to do, friends, family, work, other commitments.
Their own mental health issues as well. Yeah.
So I think it's important to signal. And thank you for pointing out that I was at work and I was busy that day. You remembered all the details. Brought it back to my mind.
She was like, I'll come back to you at the end of the day. But,
you did.
No, you did. I know I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But the truth is, in that moment, I didn't have capacity, and that can lead to a rushed decision.
Right.
Exactly.
And I needed to have the headspace, the capacity, and the empathy, frankly, to really give you a little bit of time so I could really hear what was going on.
Of course. Yes, we've had similar.
Yeah.
So it must be a doctor thing. So when can I put you in the diary for us to talk about this in more detail?
And that can seem a bit cold and formal, but this is with that sustainability in mind. Because maybe in the moment you can drop everything, but then it becomes a challenge further down the line. And just speaking frankly, sometimes you're trying to extricate yourself from that support network. So it's better to go a bit gently and say, okay, let's meet for a coffee, or I've got half an hour free at this time, let's speak. And then you don't have to solve everything in one go.
Can I just really pick up on that? I think I want to really hone in on the idea that this is potentially a long-term context. By that, or long-term solution. I don't want to use the word solution, because I think often in that spirit of we want to help, we can fall into the idea that actually, we'll just provide a solution, provide support, give you some money, call you X times, and then, in 1 month you'll be back on your feet. So I've struggled with depression, and I've come to terms, and I've had 2 definite bouts of depression, and I've come to terms with the stats that you're much more likely to experience depression subsequent times after you've had it once. So it's about like, okay, how am I going to take care of myself when it happens again, or if when it happens again? I have another friend who has struggled with she they say it's bipolar, and a little bit of and some anxiety, some generalized anxiety, and this has been decades.
Yeah.
And what happens in terms of support is there's a group of us that think, all right, you know what, let's people who are watching,
rally
let's
round.
rally and let's fix it for now. Let's fix it once and for all, not for now, once and for all.
Yes, of course.
And so
Like an intervention.
there's
Yeah.
an intervention, and I go back and forth. Some of us go back and forth with, how are we going to support for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years? Let us accept that this is a condition that this person is carrying through life. And what does that look like? So I think I just want to hone in that there is, sometimes there is that sense of, all right, we'll come, we'll solve it. And then you get back on your feet. Why haven't you got back on your feet? We've helped you.
Yes.
But actually this, for some of us, is a lifelong experience.
Yeah. Really important point, because speaking very honestly here, resentment can build.
Yes.
In that instance. It's sort of that idea that I didn't really sign up for this. So
as the friend, right?
As the friend,
Got it.
Going slowly
is
is the key takeaway for me.
Yeah.
Tosin.
Just based on what you said, and the fact that I think what you've just highlighted now about this potentially being a lifelong condition that the person may have to go through. So how much of, when we're now discussing again, going back to mental health in general, do we attribute to genetic disposition? And then I think I read recently inherited trauma, and those layers of basically diagnosis that really that the person cannot help themselves, and it just depends on what the circumstances are around their treatment that will that will determine their survival through this.
So remembering that we're talking about a very broad range of conditions, I mentioned that term biopsychosocial.
Yeah.
So I referenced it in relation to the treatments we can offer, but that's also relevant to the causes of mental health conditions.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep it fairly general, but broadly speaking, most of these conditions, all of them pretty much that we've talked about, may have a biological basis. So if you have a family member who's got depression, for example, you're more likely over the course of your lifetime to become depressed than someone who doesn't have a family history of depression. Now, that may only occur in the context of psychosocial or environmental stresses. So a major life event such as bereavement or losing your job or divorce. So the key thing here is that there isn't a predictability to this. And we're not able to say, in most cases, oh, you became depressed because of this biological factor, or you definitely became depressed because of this set of circumstances.
Right.
It's just an understanding that these different factors play a role. Now, there may be some conditions that are a bit more specific to those circumstances. So if one has experienced a major traumatic event, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, isn't the only potential consequence, but you can more readily associate the event occurring and the onset of the condition. So yeah, it's important to throw out all these questions, because I think what I see particularly in Nigerian culture is an ignorance about these things, and then we come up with these other explanations. You mentioned the demonization of Conor Ben, and we see that a lot in Nigerian culture, that something must have happened, or it might just simply be put down to drugs, which can play a role in the onset of some mental health conditions. And the one that tends to come to mind would be psychosis. But to this day, we still hear it, that it's too simplistic an understanding that a young person goes through some sort of crisis, oh, it must be because they were using drugs. It's often much more nuanced than that.
Of course. Of course.
And actually, I mean, when I think about people I've known, quite often those who get into using heavy drugs, the drugs are masking something they're already struggling with,
Yeah.
rather than the other way around, right? So,
We
yeah,
have about 15 minutes left, I
yeah.
think. Yeah, so what do we want to...
Well, so while we've been talking about what the society can do to support people, what about, you know, people who get to a point where they accept, I need help, I want help,
Yeah.
or family members go, you know, we're giving the support, we're listening here, but this needs to go beyond us. You know, how do we? What are the steps people can take to get help? Actually, I'll throw you just very interesting one. Just you mentioned the other day the Uncle Tom thing, and this is referring to in a lot of Black communities, especially when we think about the West Indian, there is a lot of historical and current skepticism about, I'll call it Western medicine, for a variety of reasons. So basically, you know, a lot of Black people just do not trust white medics, full stop. So which is why I remember the Uncle Tom thing. What can we do for those who go, okay, I need help? Where should they start?
Can I just interject? Sometimes for good reason, because there are clear examples historically of how medicine has used the bodies of Black people, ignored, not cutting people up without painkillers, ignoring pain, using stem cells, experimentation,
using live people for
putting
as test
tuberculosis,
subjects, yeah.
Exactly. So I just wanted to say, I do acknowledge what you've said, but I didn't want it to go without saying that
yes.
it wasn't
and I didn't mention it as a positive or negative, but I
Yeah.
think it's a worthwhile clarification. Thank you.
But it gets more complicated than that, because what can happen as a Black psychiatrist in a predominantly white culture is that we can too readily say, oh, so there's a young Black man with a mental health condition. Oh yeah, he'll be a good fit. And actually, we've got to remember that we're talking about subcultures within communities that exist. So I might not identify with that person, and I might have a very different worldview to that individual, and I might be seen as the Uncle Tom, part of the system, rather than us identifying with our common race. So it can be tricky, and without being too big-headed, maybe we're going to get an audience that stretches across geographies. So how help is sought in different geographies is going to be different.
Yes.
Good point.
So in some situations, you might have to go through a general practitioner or primary care physician to access secondary mental health care, which is what you experienced. And in other instances, you might be able to go straight to that mental health support, be it a psychologist or psychiatrist. And I would say, just as a crude rule of thumb, if we're not quite sure what's going on, maybe the psychiatrist or the primary care physician might be the starting point to get that diagnosis. But if there are specific issues someone is struggling with, maybe that might not require a diagnostic label, but you've identified those issues, a psychologist or psychotherapist may be an appropriate starting point. One of the things that's possibly going to be the toughest thing, I would say, and it applies more to some conditions than others, it'll be tough for people to hear, is that as a family member, as a friend, there's a limit to what you can do.
Yeah.
You can signpost, you can build up your own knowledge as to what's available. And I've had this situation whilst trying to support a friend, and it's really hard to get this point across, but ultimately they're responsible for their behavior.
Yeah.
And so there may be a limit. And the starkest example would be with use of drugs and alcohol.
True.
And I said earlier that when we think about Black mental health, a lot of people start thinking psychosis. And that's an important area to discuss, but I'll talk about one that we don't talk about, particularly in the Nigerian community, drugs and alcohol. Big, big problems. The Nigerian community, we are heavy drinkers, particularly in Nigeria. And you talked about IK using drugs to mask stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And alcohol is a classic example. And we like weddings and parties, and it's done in a celebratory context often, but frankly the levels of consumption are huge.
Yeah.
So that's a particular area where you can tell anyone about the harms it's causing. And think of a simple example of smoking. You can tell someone smoking's bad, it's going to harm yourself, it's going to harm other people, but the only person that can bring about that change is that individual.
Yeah.
So it's tricky because we've thrown in these themes of potentially the long-term nature of these conditions. Not all of them are. Some might be shorter episodes. Some mental health conditions wax and wane. So there'll be periods where it's very acute. Other times the symptoms go into remission. They may or may not come back.
Absolutely.
And one of the tips here for a family member would be, when things have settled, that's also a time for you to adopt a slightly different approach. So if I'm on the phone for hours on end with someone in a crisis, and that's appropriate, when the crisis has ended, that's your opportunity explicitly to say, I know we've been speaking every day. Can we now speak in a week's time? Can we speak in a month's time? Because there might be something that comes further down the track.
Wow, it's very helpful.
Yeah, very true. Again, actually, just for listeners, your point about young Black man, suitable psychiatrist. I was 40 when I had therapy, and my psychologist was a 63-year-old white man from Brighton. We both love sports, but not the same sport, right? So I'm just saying that to anyone who's listening who is afraid, they've referred me to someone who doesn't look like me, doesn't get me, can't even pronounce my name correctly. Don't let that stop you. The key point is, are they a good professional who is interested in your well-being? That's really got to be key.
And sometimes actually the beauty comes from our differences.
Yeah.
Because that's the spur for our curiosity.
Yes.
So I'd encourage people that whilst we sometimes understandably think, they're going to understand me a bit better if they're more like me. Actually, it's when someone doesn't understand, tell me about your traditional wedding. What was that all about? That's where you get to the meaty
Good point.
Points, actually. So difference can be challenging, but it shouldn't be a barrier to seeking help.
Absolutely.
Yeah, actually, think about the overlap with the work I do as a coach. I often have to remind myself, don't presume you know this person. Tell yourself you know nothing about them and ask those questions. So that's a good reminder. Conscious of time, anything else anyone wants to say, because we should start wrapping up? Anything that you feel should be said in this? We hope there'll be future conversations, but if this is the sole one, anything that you want people to hear?
It's going to be a difficult question, and we talked a little bit about this.
Okay.
What do we think healthy mental health looks like? Is that something that we feel we could share, or that we're even able to share?
I think that in the context of what we've been discussing, maybe this isn't ambitious enough, but I think healthy conversations is a starting point. Because for all the great conversation we've had today, you can go into certain workplaces tomorrow within the context we've been talking about, and you'll see that there's a long way to travel. So it goes back, I think, to the storytelling, the leadership, the courage, and just trying to shift the status quo. That's quite a big task in itself.
Yeah. Small steps.
So was your question what's the macro mental health, as Chichi just answered, or were you talking about
Well,
individuals?
Individuals, if
Okay. In terms of my personal experience,
yeah.
what I would say is when that person seems to be themselves, that's a healthy, then so if it's someone you know very well or intimately, when you notice they're not being themselves,
I love that.
that's a sign.
I love that.
And that's going to differ hugely
Yes.
for, so if it's a normally chatty person who suddenly becomes withdrawn, and so that's what I would encourage people to look out for.
I'll just add one other thing that I think has been really helpful for me, and we haven't necessarily mentioned yet. For me, naming what I'm experiencing, naming my emotions, like just helps me. It's a mindfulness practice, and it separates me from my emotion. Like, oh, I notice I have been feeling not so happy, not so sunshiny these days. That's interesting. Oh, I notice I am anxious about this. Okay. So it doesn't fix it, but it is one step in terms of just kind of naming my emotions, separating myself from the emotion. And then thinking, okay, what has worked in the past to help me manage what I'm going through? That has been a healthful behavior for me.
And in naming, is it naming to yourself, or is it helpful to name to articulate it to somebody else?
The examples I have been thinking about are just naming to myself, but I think certainly, like where appropriate, where you feel safe, where you're kind of leaning on that community, where you think actually would be really good to seek out help, then naming it to other people is also quite helpful.
Yeah, I mean, again, the similarity with physical health checks. My knee hurts. Is that a new pain? How long has it been hurting? How acute, etc. It's the same process you would want to go through with physical. My stomach hurts. Why is that? I have a headache. It's so I think that's really sensible. We're really running out of time. In terms of what we want out of this, I think all of us agree our primary goal is awareness for everyone. We've talked a lot about the Black community because, again, as you said with the example about smoking, it's, you've got to want to help yourself if you're going to get better. All the kindness, all the saviors in the world could show up, but if you don't want to, so that's, I think that's an important thing. But one thing I'm keen is, I think Chichi mentioned that things have been improving, not uniformly, but have been improving over the last 10 years. And while preparing for this, doing some reading, I came across some organizations in this space that I'd never heard of. And that for me is part of the issue. So one of my hopes is maybe this contributes to more awareness of these organizations, spurs these organizations to talk to one another more. If they were starting to flag on energy, re-energize. So I just want to name a few, and then if there are any others that you guys are aware of. There's obviously the two really big mental health, Mind, I think, is possibly the biggest in the UK. So Mind is an organization to be aware of. There's Calm, Campaign Against Living Miserably, whose main focus is trying to prevent suicide, which 75 to 80% of suicides in the UK and globally tend to be men. So they're quite relevant to this. There's an organization I found about while doing research, CAN, Caribbean and African Health Network, who have done some things in this space. There's an organization called Black Men's Health UK. I'm a Black man, lived in the UK for 30 years, never heard of them. So Black Minds Matter, I hadn't heard of either. MANSAG, I had heard of, Medical Association of Nigerians across Great Britain, which, did you used to be a member or still a member of?
Do you need to broadcast that to the world that I have not renewed my membership?
Sorry, I wasn't even thinking. Okay. MANSAG. So any other organizations that...
No, but just to highlight the point that, yes, that's an organization that brings together the professionals. I also wasn't aware of some of those organizations, just to...
Okay.
to bring home the point there.
So yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
this issue that we all want to improve. We all can play a role in doing that, and that's again not just the four of us. Anyone who's listening, if you're aware of any of these organizations or others that aren't on this list, actually just think about it. Birmingham, Lewisham, and Islington borough councils have all had in the last 3-4 years various initiatives to do with mental health amongst Black men. So the NHS, is it NHS Digital? I can't remember. Have invested in a few initiatives. So really, I'm hoping somehow all these organizations can find a way to start communicating with each other. If you think we can play a role, as in those in the room, get in touch. We'll do what we can.
Absolutely.
Can I throw out one example of creativity? Because I always like to avoid trying to be too prescriptive with what people should do. I used to cut my hair at a barbershop in Camden. And around the country, there have been barbershop initiatives.
True.
Why? Because barbershops are a place where you will get young Black men and older Black men as well, if we've still got any hair left. And the point about that environment is it's a place where conversations are free-flowing. Nothing is off limits.
Yeah.
So that's a place, to your point about noticing when someone isn't their normal self.
True.
They train the barbers to be competent in what we call mental health first aid, which is just being confident and asking those questions about how people are doing and signposting them to help. So that's a fantastic initiative.
Excellent.
Yeah, I was also, just to add to the list, because a lot of what we've shared is UK specific. I can't remember their names right now, but there's a great group online on X who focus on mental health in Nigeria. So there are little pockets, just kind of do the research. When I mention it to people, they're like, oh, I'm surprised, but there will be, online other communities that people can, or sources of help that people can find.
Superb. The clock says 38 seconds left. So thank you all three of you for giving up your time. It took us a while to find a date we could all do, so I'm glad we did. Thank you for giving up your time. Thank you to everyone listening, watching. If you've made it this far, thank you. And yes, please look after yourselves, look after your loved ones, and look out for the Black men around you. You never know which one's hurting. All right, good. Sayonara.